welcome to Dragons, Gazelles, and Unicorns. I'm Rosemary Freeman, founder and CEO of the Center for Advanced Innovation. And I'm absolutely thrilled today to have Amir Bozorgzadeh on from Virtuleap. So Amir, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You're going to be providing some really great, insightful information about entrepreneurship and your journey.
I'm thrilled. I've been a big fan of yours and the podcast, and being part of your program. So thank you for having me on.
I'm thrilled to have you. So tell us about your fantastic background.
So I'm actually from Vancouver, but I've been an expat for about 12 years, and a lot of time was spent in Dubai. I was a market researcher to start with, moved into mobile games publishing. I launched the first time bank in the Middle East during the middle of that. Just my first social impact startup. And then about 4 years ago, I relocated with my wife, who's from Spain, to Europe. And at that time, I started writing for VentureBeat and TechCrunch, especially on the VR and AR sector. I ran a couple of these global WebVR hackathons. And so I kind of used those tools as a way to, without making any money doing any of those things, it was more of my way to kind of understand the landscape of this kind of brave new world. And I kind of discovered along the way of writing and running these events that the only critical use cases for spatial computing, VR and AR alike, is pretty much in education and healthcare. Those are the two sectors where it can serve as a critical use case. And everywhere else, especially escapism and entertainment, it's really nice to have, but it's not critical. And at that point, my background really shifted into being obsessive about healthcare and education applications of VR, which really brought me to my current startup.
So tell us about what time banking is.
Time banking is actually a concept that was developed by Edgar Kahn in the US, in fact. And it's a concept of you essentially create a bank of people's time. People earn time dollars, or in the Middle East, time dirhams, by spending 1 hour of their time giving service to someone in their community. And then they earn that time hour that could be spent to receive some help from someone else in the community.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. Very interesting concept. Did it make money?
It was acquired by the Dubai government. It was definitely a very challenging project because it requires a lot of social cohesion. And in the Middle East and a lot of transient societies in the Middle East, lots of expats and people from all over, it's hard to sometimes do that, versus in the US and the UK and Western Europe in general. Time banking is a very thriving model.
Great. Well, so then you got into VR and AR. How did you get into that?
And these events and writing about it, I found those two critical use cases of ed tech and healthcare, and it's just profound what happens in terms of how our whole bodies respond from a neuroscience and biochemistry kind of way. FDA kind of really declared VR a very important medically oriented technology back in March 6th when they held a public workshop, because VR, for whatever reasons, and we're not really clear on the reasons just yet, but it dampens pain receptors. So for chronic pain management, it is a significant tool that can be used in lieu of opioid treatments and so on. And in the last decade, it's really made some headway, especially in the US. US is like the best market for seeing some of the most pioneering work that's been done in having VR applied for isolation therapy for the senior living communities, for desensitization therapy of phobias like my fear of heights. And I guess that a lot of my interest in VR and then VR for healthcare and VR for education is to, help me overcome my own barriers. I think it's actually a very selfish reason underneath it all. It's my craving to be that much more liberated.
So tell us about Virtuleap.
We started initially in 2018, very R&D and very deep tech, developing these what we were calling biometric algorithms that would essentially, in a VR or AR environment, infer your emotional state based on your body language alone. So like a device like the Oculus Go at that time was the leading one. It's a 3 degrees of freedom device. So it's the kind that it's mostly kind of a glorified 360 video viewer. It's not really a 3D rendered environment VR experience. But at that time, even that very simplistic device with only one controller and no kind of body tracking, that collects like 16 different data points of your body language that from a neuroscience point of view, using a lot of the studies that we found about that, we could make it into mathematical models that could maybe tell us what emotional states people are in. And we were creating that for about a year. Very hard time in the VR sector to be a deep tech startup without a very clear commercialization strategy. And so as of May 2019, we pivoted and took our IP and moved it into where we think, we're certain VR does have, and our technology does have a critical use case and a clear commercialization strategy, which is basically taking cognitive assessment and training to the next level, thanks to virtual reality, as well as very recently we moved into also integrating machine learning.
So can you give us some examples of taking the cognitive capabilities to the next level?
So we are the next generation of apps like Lumosity on the one hand. So brain training on your screen-based apps essentially offers you access to a daily workout of games that have been, well, cognitive science gamified into a library of games that is all designed about basically a gym for the mind, testing and training different cognitive abilities like your memory skills and your task switching skills and your problem solving skills. But move it into VR and you also have spatial orientation and spatial audio awareness and motor skills. But the real hypothesis of our technology is that brain training can only really work in a multisensory environment, one that triggers the autonomic nervous system and the vestibular balance system and our proprioception into believing the experience is real. And we think that as much as those screen-based brain training apps have been pioneering, there's a real clear ceiling that's being hit when you're just twiddling your thumbs, interacting with that device in that experience.
Well, have you seen the device that you rely on? And it's VR, and you're actually like either swimming or you're flying, and you have to control all these parts of your body to fly correctly, otherwise you're gonna hit something. And it's apparently a great ab workout.
Yeah. Now, what you're talking about is my dream stuff. Like it's when you also pair VR experiences with customized hardware tailored for that experience. Like one of the experiences that kind of you remind me of is the Birdie experience. Is a French company that made this. You go into like a machine that basically mimics the bird movements and you're flying above New York City. And
fantastic.
I couldn't breathe the first second that turned on because again, I have a phobia of heights and my wife had to come over and walk over and say, breathe. And I was like shocked. I was just looking how to abort this experience because it really triggered my my whole body into believing I was flying above New York City.
Okay, so where do I get this thing?
I will send you links after this. But you know, the problem with customized hardware in a biblical plague world as we're in right now is it's getting harder to access it unless, I mean, who will buy these custom hardware? Usually they will be accessible in these nice location-based VR centers and stuff, which I love because they give those kind of access. But it's harder now. I doubt Rosemary would order one of these Birdie simulators, but who knows? Maybe you
never know.
You never know. It would be great. I think that would be something in the next few years would probably be more possible. It's just I'm not sure how much space you want to throw with these things, and the iteration of the VR technology is just so rapid that maybe your Birdie simulator needs to be upgraded in 6 months, and you know.
So you said it has to be multi-sensory. So really, you get the best brain training when it's multi-sensory. So smell, touch.
See, we can't put in smell yet. We can't really put haptics like touch yet. But the visual sense in most situations, the visual sense, and this comes back down to why VR serves as such a effective treatment for chronic pain, is that the visual sense. My theory and my belief is that the visual sense serves as more of a master sense in most people's circuitry. And so when you create an alternative reality to the visual sense, the other sibling senses will start to get a little disoriented, and they perhaps dampen for that purpose, for that reason, that disorientation with a dual reality that has suddenly appeared in your cortex. And so it's a similar way with how we have created our games, is that the visual sense has a dramatic effect in and of itself. And that starting from that point, we can, of course, limited only to the hardware and what is available to the market right now, we can incorporate sense by sense by sense as it's feasible. Right now, we're more about creating games that are direct translations, ideally, of very, very well-known and well-used, commonly used by the scientific community, the cognitive science community, for use cases like rehabilitation. So we translate games like based on the Stroop test, or another type of game that we just launched called Magic Deck, is based on a game developed by Dr. Sahakian at Cambridge University for treating schizophrenia. So so with each of these games, they're not coming out of thin air. They're not developed by game developers in and by themselves. They're designed by a cognitive scientist or neuroscientist, and then developed so that they are in and of themselves just as much games as they are scientific objective rubrics.
Wow, very exciting. So it's very, very interesting that you went from this body tracking to determine the emotional state to the cognitive assessment and brain training, and using science, combining it with technology, and basically gamifying the science.
Absolutely. I feel very grateful. Obviously, there's a lot of sacrifice and pain involved in being a founder of a VR startup in such territory. And things are getting much better because there's so much traction and so much validation. But there is no more potent intersection of technologies than that of science and emerging technologies like VR, like IoT, and AI across all the branches of AI, from natural language processing, and all the ways that machine learning can be applied with virtual beings and autonomous avatars. And there's just the intersection is so potent. It's remarkable, and we really are at that intersection, and we're just diving at it from our particular angle. But there's so many amazing startups right now creating such impactful solutions at this intersection.
So where do you think you're going to be in 5 years?
I wrote my last article for VentureBeat last September, and it was about it featured a game called Sea Hero Quest, which is a game developed by the UK Alzheimer's Association in partnership with and funded by Deutsche Telekom. And this was a game that was developed in mobile version and VR version, and it tested spatial navigation as you ride a boat. And they found that the VR version, 2 minutes of VR gameplay generated over 5 hours worth of lab research for the study of Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And that they collected well over 2,000 years of research data that they're not going to be able to deal with in their lifetimes unless they bring in machine learning. Mm-hmm. And so if you ask us what we are in relation to that, and in relation to last month, Achille Interactive or Achille Labs winning, the FDA declaring their game, Endeavor RX, the first game to be a prescribed treatment for pediatric ADHD, that games are now declared medicine, and that games can also be, in terms of big data and gameplay patterns, a huge treasure trove for so many insights that can possibly be used for so many applications in a healthcare and educational setting. Then we are a library of volumetric games designed according to scientific principles, where the noise should be as minimal as possible, and that we can be able to mine with the help of machine learning in order to create algorithms that serve as digital health markers for the early detection of cognitive illnesses like Alzheimer's. And so if you ask us ask me where the company would be headed, my vision of it is that it's not just a VR company, it's not just a serious games company, or education or healthcare company, but a data company that can leverage our performance and behaviors in a way that gives us a depth of insights that is simply unprecedented.
Yeah, I remember speaking with you about the Alzheimer's, using games to detect early Alzheimer's. And then of course you can retrain the brain so that it doesn't get Alzheimer's.
Knock on wood.
So diagnostic and a prevention, and maybe a prognostic as well.
The diagnostic part, yeah, the diagnostic part is less controversial. When you get into therapeutic, still less controversial. But then when you say about remediation and repair and even prevention and all these things, then we're treading into territory that requires so much studies and so on. Lumosity did a lot of overhyped marketing that got them into trouble, and got them fined and so on. And we never want to be on the wrong side of the regulatory bodies. But you're so right, and I'm completely with you. And that's exactly the direction we're going. And with the FDA declaring games as medicine last month, you're going to see a flood. It's going to be I'm so surprised there's not like big CNN and BBC coverage of games are declared medicine. But of course, coronavirus and the madness of the world right now is flooding us with noise. But it's huge. And digiceuticals is going to be just something to behold this decade.
So everybody remember that this Amir said digiceuticals. And also I think, since I've done strategy for so long, I always look for big trigger points like this. I mean, it's a very big trigger point, and it shows quite a lot of flexibility, frankly, from the FDA. Endeavor RX, you guys go look it up, Endeavor RX by Achille Labs.
There's no bigger news. It's like landing on the moon to me, it really is. And it's crazy. It is like games are medicine. Games can be prescribed by doctors as treatment, as alternative to drugs. It's remarkable. It's as remarkable as it can get. And it opens up such crazy applications like, can we use games as an amplification for the placebo effect? There's a company I mentor right now called PMI Therapeutics, and that's exactly what they're approaching. Can we amplify the placebo effect in order to increase the positive outcomes of cancer treatments and the like? So
yeah,
it's absolutely amazing.
So I have to tell you a funny story. So one of our startups in our scale challenge, the name of the company is called Playwell. So we did the scale challenge in partnership with the Walton family. And we're doing the final investor forum on September 2nd. We're very excited about that. But this guy is so funny. He pitched, he must have pitched about 7 times, and we gave him feedback and everything. And I said, well, what kind of games? Because he also is using games to change behavior. And I said, well, what kind of games do people play? And he says, well, they can play any game they want because it's the way he has it organized. And then he's mentioned some of the games, and he was like, I didn't know what any of the games were. He said, Rosemary, I have one goal with you. I want you to play games. So.
Absolutely. I think games are, really underrepresented in our adult lives. And I think they're probably going to be brought back in a very playful way to make us much more appreciative of their therapeutic effects just in partaking in them. It's a games as science. I mean, what a pair.
So how do people get, what are your products that you have right now?
Right. So we've just actually released the full version of our enhanced VR brain training app last week. It's rolling out through all the major stores this week. This is Oculus by Facebook, and HTC, and Valve has their own Steam VR, and each of these major manufacturers have their headsets, and we support any of them that offer 6 degrees of freedom. So when your body moves, the content moves. That's the type of headsets we cover and support, and we support all of them pretty much, or will very shortly. And that app is basically a daily workout of a few random games that you play for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then you get back into the real world, and then you come back as regularly as you can manage for another 10 minutes at a time, and you see how you perform differently or better. And we've created a a game scoring system called the Enhanced Performance Index. And it's kind of like giving yourself an IQ per game and then grouped upon the category that that game is part of, like memory games and flexibility games, and each one has their category. And then you have a universal EPI score. And that's the kind of the way that you can compare yourself to yourself, as well as to aggregates and to other demographics and other kind of, ways of slicing and dicing your data. You report every time you log in the number of hours you slept and your mood, and so that you can actually see if your lifestyle or your quality of sleep or your state of mind has any direct impact on any of those categories specifically, or all of them, or none of them. It's a wealth of insights.
Yeah.
And we've released a web application for organizations too, like hospitals, clinics, and senior living communities. And it's actually even more advanced to the app. It's basically a way for those organizations to use the web application to manage and monitor engagement and track the performance and monitor kind of that performance of their users, which we think is just as much important for institutions and organizations or schools as they are to individual users. We're releasing a mobile companion app soon that even allows for like caregivers to actually remote control the experiences other people are inside of it, because in a COVID world, you can't just keep on taking off the headset and having someone else help you with it and have all that interaction. We can remote control the whole experience as a caregiver.
Wow. That's really good. Great. I mean, so just for the audience, Enhanced Performance Index, you're kind of gamifying the game even. So across all the users, you can see how you fit in
Right.
other users and how your EPI scores differ. And
Exactly.
it's also measuring how much your memory gets better, your flexibility gets better. That's all part of your Enhanced Performance Index score. I love it.
Exactly. And the thing about it is one game is just one game. It's a closed loop game, a mini game. It's designed as a 3-minute experience at a pop. So what happens is in 3 minutes, or even maybe sometimes less, you're playing a game that's testing your memory skills and you're leveling up based on the level of difficulty. And so each one is level based. And so, you get to level 7 and that's like really pushing you to your limits. And then you see if you can over time get better at that score. But my personal interest is to, and this is a very naive interest perhaps, is that we glorify caricatures. When we're really good at one thing, we love people who are Tiger Woods in one thing, or Michael Jordan in one thing. We don't like wholesomeness too much, even though we say ideologically we do. We hate our Achilles heel. We hate looking at our weaknesses. At least that's my experience. Is we might talk about improving ourselves, but we don't like losing. And so in a way, when you look at these games and you play all of them, for example, myself, in the real world, I get lost very easily in like rural European towns that are like labyrinths. And my wife is from this region, so she laughs at me. She's like, how can you be lost after 3 days of navigating through this? And I just have no true north. And in the games that are targeting spatial orientation, you'll see I'm weak in those games. And so there's a lot of self-insight you get from a data side of playing these games. But more importantly, it's the most enjoyable way that you can try to develop on your weakness otherwise. It's like Mary Poppins, spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. You're not going to want to develop yourself and your weaknesses typically unless they're fashioned in a way that they're non-judgmental, they're safe, and they're hopefully some element of fun.
Yeah. So can you compare yourselves with others directly?
It's definitely on the roadmap. I've always kind of been wary of it. I know some of the other brain training apps do that, and it's really good. And we do want to have experiments where you do have competition of a certain variety in the games too, because that's an element that is very natural to tribalism and human evolution, right? The social aspect is key. But I just, I want to avoid people who are very competitive of playing games for competitive sake, rather than looking into themselves and into their soul and be wholesome. But we definitely have it in the roadmap. We certainly do.
Yeah, there's a group called Trauma Gym. You ever heard of that?
Say it again.
It's a PAVI, PAVI, and they have these special workout rooms that have lights and sensors, and it's determining how much you throw the ball against the wall, things of that nature. and it optimizes based on your strength. So it will provide more resistance in some areas if you are stronger. Anyway, they share the data. So when you go in, you have the app. They share the data of your performance in that class, across that class, and then across all the other classes in the world.
Interesting.
And to me, I don't think I want to see some of that. I'm pretty strong, but yeah.
Well, yes. Here's an interesting aspect of that, though. Early on, we were deciding, how does the game scoring system work, and how does the games themselves respond? Do they respond in a customized way, tailored to the user? And the thing is, that's a really cool way to go, but we can't do it personally. We have to, because it will destroy the objectivity of the data. You see, if the games are always adapting to you, then it's no longer objective, the scoring. That needs to be kind of indifferent to the user. And so, if you do the SAT score test, it has to be not customized to you. It has to just be an objective rubric, right? And the main key thing about this is because we're on a long road of on the way to clinical trials and all that stuff, and feasibility studies. And we're partnered with institutions like the Pacific Brain Health Center in California, and many a bunch in the US, and a few in the Europe, and example that test on healthy populations, on elderly populations, on populations with diabetes, on populations with addiction, and veterans, for example.
That's great.
Because diabetes and addiction actually causes an acceleration, a cognitive deterioration at an accelerated rate. I didn't really know that, but so
really, that's very interesting.
Yeah, the VA contact that we're working with, the principal investigator, David Pennington, he's specifically focused on the VA Medical Health Center on studies that are focused on cognitive rehabilitation or remediation for veterans.
And how about PTSD?
Like it's just treading into very specific, like it's the same thing as cognitive disorders like schizophrenia or something. It's very specific, and there might be games that really help in some aspects, but I think for PTSD, it's more about behavioral therapy in a VR setting and so on, something more nuanced. They would certainly perhaps use a tool like ours as a baseline, as a gold standard way of baselining whether there's improvement in a person with PTSD or something. It'd be really interesting to see their profiles as they're going through a therapeutic experience. Or, for example, if someone wants to, promote a certain type of new vitamins or drugs that might be saying that they can improve your performance, as we always kind of see, then you use a battery of tests, traditional as well as, emerging like ours, to see whether there is in fact any change. So we're using diagnostics in that way as well, but it requires us not to be able to make our gaming experiences adaptive to users too much. And also we can make the data very customized to users, but not the gameplay mechanics.
It would be very interesting to use your game in combination with, for example, going to a dietitian and optimizing what you eat, or Naveen Jain's company that basically does a test on, you put your poop in these little containers for 30 days, they take it away and they say, well, here are the food you should eat, here are the food you shouldn't eat. And then you go through that, you change your diet, and then you play the game and see how your scores change.
Absolutely. Lifestyle changes. My wife and I, we went on a trip, and if we go to Spain, we're eating way more carbs and drinking way more alcohol than we should be. And we come back and we're like, typically we have acid reflux in some degree or another, and we're, it's dramatic what diet can do and things like that. Lifestyle changes. I mean, how does it really affect some of your abilities? Sometimes it might be subtle, but still significant. And our tool is sensitive enough. Our games are sensitive enough because it's a library of games. It's not just, a bunch. It's going to be a growing library of games. We're constantly adding to them. We'll have 12 games by the end of this year, 35 by the end of next year. That's our forecast. And it's all about rich library of games and making it as objective as possible to let you know what is the impact of whatever And hopefully with clinical studies and so on in the future, we can see if the games regularly played themselves can also have an enhancing effect, which is more or less the reason the name is the name.
Yeah. Well, so if for people who don't really understand how VR works, could you explain, like, what would somebody have to do? They have to buy the glasses, the headset, then how do they get access to your product? And then how does does the library automatically come onto their device? Could you explain that?
So it really is at this point. I mean, there's been such rapid iteration in the last few years. It's so crazy how much the hardware has evolved. And in terms of the form factor, which is meaning it's lighter, more comfortable, and the price has just dropped. And so now we have the generation of headsets now, the Oculus Quest, the HTC Vive Focus Plus. These are devices that do not have these awkward cords anymore. You get them in the box, just like a smartphone. You take them out and you put them on instead of putting them in your hand. You turn them on and you enter the particular device's app ecosystem. It's just put it on. You're in the app ecosystem. You have a login name, just like you have an account on, iTunes or whatever, and you have apps that you can download. You have free apps that are preloaded in. It really is standalone experience at this point. If you get the Oculus Quest or whichever competitor devices, you just put it on. It voila is a ecosystem that you're in. You're in that world, and that world is 3D. Sure, it's a little bit weird at first, but it's very easily something that you just adapt into, and you just click, point. If it's a free download, you just click and download it and play it, or if you purchase it, it's it's just the same thing as the app ecosystem.
So they click on your app, and then they download, and then is the whole library there?
Yep. Exactly. So, our games are available right now. When we get to a later stage, we'll probably enter into a freemium subscription model where you get a fixed number of games that you get to play for your workout. And then you might have to pay a subscription to be able to access the wider library of games, as well as maybe some advanced analytics and so on, so that you can keep our company's lights on and let us keep on building up the game library, improving things. But we do think the price point is going to continuously go down. The new Oculus device is coming out not so long from now, and you're going to see prices going down. You're going to see lighter devices. If 5G rolls out, as we fingers crossed it does roll out properly, that means devices will get significantly lighter and significantly cheaper, because 5G just enables VR and AR like nothing else. It's like the most powerful technology to pair with VR, because you'll be able to stream virtual reality content and augmented reality content. You won't need to download anymore. You won't need to install anymore. And in fact, even the processing on your device won't even have to happen on the device anymore, because it'll be done on what they call edge servers. I don't want to get into too much of that jazz, but it's remarkable. Things will get much more accessible and very soon.
You won't believe this, but let's see. I think 28 years ago, I wrote an article on edge servers.
No.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I was looking at it the other day.
There's very few people who know exactly what edge servers are, typically in my group of friends and so on. It's not, but it will be something very well known and not so long from now.
So when do you think the 5G is going to roll out? When do you think this is going to all happen?
It's so hard to say. In the US, perhaps very soon, but in Europe, there's a lot more regulatory red tape between all these countries. Some countries even ban it sometimes or temporarily because of unfounded fears and conspiratorial kind of views on what the health implications are, just like 4G experience. So and they're not supported by research in my understanding. So it's a little tricky, but I would say it won't be part of your normal life until a minimum of 5 years from now, unfortunately. It's just such a tremendous amount of capital that has to be outlaid by governments and telecoms in order to make it possible. We're talking like, the millimeter waves are so much more fragile. They can't sometimes pass through walls. So you have to have a lot of them all over the place, on every golf post. It's a little bit Big Brother-ish and scary if you're not as comfortable with the idea as I am. And, I've really studied it really a lot. And I just think the benefits are just so tremendous, and I'm so excited for them to come out. But there are a lot of barriers that are just, practical, like funds and and political stuff, but hopefully within 5 years, we'll start to see them roll out majorly in a lot of cities, the major cities first, and then maybe another 2 or 3 years before we see them in rural areas.
Mm-hmm. Last mile. So, what impresses me about you is you are so humble. You've got this great startup. You're selling the product. You're doing you're paving, you're trailblazing, paving new foundations. It's very, very exciting. You have clinical trials, partnerships with large organizations doing clinical trials. You're making a lot of progress. You're changing the dynamics of the industry. I mean, you're really very, very impressive. What is the most important thing that you've learned as you've been created your company, pivoted, growing your company?
I think when you're an emerging tech startup, you have to particularly be adaptable beyond your comfort zone, whatever that comfort zone is. And you have to be paired up with a co-founder, hopefully, ideally, if you have that luxury, that complements you in a very, in your psychographic profile on all your weaknesses that I'll map it on our game, in Enhance VR. If we can find the complementary, diametrically opposite person, or your soulmate, not necessarily your lover, but your soulmate in a business setting, maybe you can match both together. That can really help you psychologically go through the trials of running a startup that invariably and inevitably faces so many challenges and setbacks that are so unpredictable and so highly hard to kind of predict. And so, emotionally, you have to be as resilient as possible to not, just go completely gray in a short number of years. And so adaptability is and forbearance. And a lot of these things I can say them, but my God, it's a roller coaster ride constantly. Morning to night can be a completely different state of mind. And so you have to know what you're into. You can't have any illusions of grandeur or illusions of success or illusions of any of those things. You have to be extremely humble. And any day that you're above ground as a startup, it is a very, I've been growing and developing and fostering like a sense of gratitude. Just counting my blessings in the smallest things constantly. And that keeps me mentally sane.
I have a lot of gratitude every morning for my coffee. I have a lot of gratitude for coffee.
I absolutely agree. That I wake up for coffee. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, so I think that what you're saying is make sure you have your psychographic mapped. You have a complementary partner. You're emotionally resilient. You're adaptable. You have forbearance. Morning to night, be ready to pivot. Your morning might be great. Your night might not be, but humble and foster gratitude. These are all fantastic qualities.
These are huge. And you know what? Like, it's really hard out there psychologically, because a lot of you'll see stories of the exceptions and you think the exception is the rule. And like they raised, X startup and X founders raised X amount and they're like, but the majority of us are not in such, those situations. We're dealing with a VC community in the early stage sector of startups, especially those of us who are very deep tech and life science oriented and doing things on the frontier. You're dealing with VCs who have growth stage mindsets being overlaid onto early stage territory. And so their expectations and their tips, where they're not actually coming from your position and your vantage point, you can be thrown left and right by advice being given from people who are not in your position. And so you have to see yourself as someone who's in the hero's journey. I think that's the most important thing. You have to appreciate what that means and value yourself for undertaking it, and not be under any illusions of any easy shortcuts that are going to happen, and develop the qualities that you have to create to become that individual at the end of the tunnel. Yeah.
It's interesting. When I decided to do what we're doing now, basically the Tinder for startups, and launching companies around inventions sitting on the shelf, I was told I'm crazy. It will never work. It'll never work. And well, I wrote a proposal up and I said, here's my risk mitigation plan and everything else. So they funded it anyway, but even though they thought it was not going to work. And then, there's another guy who wrote 2 chapters in a book about why my model would never work. And then I contacted him and he said, he called me immediately. I texted him through LinkedIn, and within 20 minutes he called me. He just did a Google search and it's easy to find my information. So, when people say something's impossible, it's about whether or not you can identify what the risks are, mitigate them, or get around them. There's lots of barriers all the time. So
you're so right. I think the number one thing that maybe sometimes people compliment me on, but it's not supposed to be really, I don't see it as a compliment, is I'm just really scrappy. And I'm gonna, like really scrappy.
Yeah.
That's the best word for it. It's just, and you have to lose your pride. You have to die a little small deaths constantly, until you're just willing to do everything possible and necessary for that baby to live.
Yes. I would say you have grit too.
Yeah.
You can't say, you definitely have grit, but you can't call yourself, I think you're also a badass. So there's like a couple of words that, you can never name yourself. You can't name yourself badass, and you can't be told, someone else has to tell you you have grit. So
I'll take it. It's an evening here in Lisbon, and I'll take that. It's definitely an honor and a badge of honor.
Yes, I agree. So I'm really thrilled that you're participating in the Innovate Children's Health Challenge. What do you think you're gonna get out of it?
So when you look at the brain training, let's go back to Lumosity as an example. They launched their app assuming that it would be tailored and their main target market would be the elderly. And then they found that actually it's drawing towards a very general population and so on. And everyone loves it for different reasons, for work and for your doing well at school and getting into your meditative flow state. Brain training can be for everyone, right? But it's still true that the elderly, for example, are a particular population that will stand to benefit the most. And at the same time, I have the elderly here and they're like maximum benefit. It's children and it's learning challenges and it's ADHD and it's dyslexia and it's the autism spectrum and it's Asperger's. And there's one of our partners in Australia is particularly interested in autism and how can brain training games be used in that setting. And it's an area that until we had the opportunity of your program, we haven't had much luck getting resonating with children's hospitals and so on to partner with us. The elderly population, for sure, there's a lot more response, but this has been a really great opportunity for us because now we can think about how do we approach this market of helping children with their learning challenges in a way that progressively also adapts for their needs in an educational side as well as a healthcare side. I think you're going to see healthcare and education really starting to bleed into each other in the next decade. So we're looking for opportunities to work with the right kinds of partners. We're looking for the right kind of feedback from the from your program and the mentors and from you and Cody to understand how do we navigate those waters, because I personally find that more dear to me than any other application of our technology.
Well, you're going to be so excited about some of our mentors.
Wonderful.
And we have 3 companies in the challenge that are doing really novel ADHD inventions, and one autism one, and PTSD because kids get it too. I mean, a lot of the kids are like had this shutdown. I mean, one of my friends, her daughter and her son, they kind of don't understand why their friends don't want to play with them, because they can't, they're not able to go out.
Oh man, that kind of stuff breaks my heart. And honestly, if you can create technology that makes a buck, but also has an impact on these kind of areas, it's just unbelievably gratifying to be able to participate in that and make it happen. And your program, I mean, honestly, for any of the challenges you bring up, if people aren't following it, they should be, because this is the best stuff. The applications, the brain race, for example,
thank you.
Unbelievable. Like more, it's the best space to be in, and I'm really watching very closely everything you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful. So what kind of advice would you have for our budding entrepreneurs that are listening today?
It's like, I've never been able to pronounce that German philosopher's name, Goethe or Goethe, you know, the German, you know, Faust and so on. Goethe, anyways, I won't try it on this show, but but he, the magnificent poet and writer, he basically said a quote that I'm paraphrasing. You know, when you start something, when you embark on something with the just simply the daringness of it, the whole world can reorganize itself for you. You shouldn't wait for the right time or the right circumstances. Sometimes I think you need to simply be as daring as possible and then burn the bridge behind you. Because until you burn that bridge behind you, a lot of people are trying to be at a company and then they want to do a little project on the side, and it's kind of like a monkey on two branches. He won't let go of the first branch until he has a firm grip with the other one. But you might not ever have a firm grip with the other one until you make a full commitment to the venture. And I suppose that's what's the difference between some types of entrepreneurs and others. And of course, mental health is important. You shouldn't go so extreme and obsessive, but you have to be fully committed and you have to burn the bridge behind you so that you can muster up all of the ingenuity and creativity that's like willing to be unlocked. And I would certainly say that's the most important advice I could possibly give.
Oh, that's fantastic. I really appreciate all the insights, extremely valuable insights you provided today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's my sincere pleasure.
It's a tremendous pleasure being on this podcast with you. A big honor. And I'm really excited to be part of the program. And I thank you for allowing me to be on here.
Oh, you're welcome. You have a great rest of your day. Thanks very much for staying up late. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.